So the other day we covered how two UK judges ruled that children under 16 in the UK were unable to give informed consent to undergo treatment with puberty-blocking drugs. Sorry, three High Court judges ruled. The case was brought against Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust, which is the only gender identity clinic in the United Kingdom, which said it had been disappointed but immediately suspended such referrals for under 16s. One of the claimants, a Miss Kira Bell, said she was delighted by the judgment. She had been referred to the Tavistock Centre, which runs the UK's only gender identity development service, as a teenager and was prescribed puberty blockers at age 16. She argued that the clinic should have challenged her more over the decision to transition to a male as a teenager because she took all of these puberty blocking drugs and had a double mastectomy. Judges said, given the long-term consequences of the clinical interventions at issue in this case, and given that the treatment is as yet innovative and experimental, we recognise that clinicians may well regard these cases where the authorisation of the court should be sought prior to commencing the clinical treatment. This didn't sit very well with the Tavistock Centre, which has now appealed, and I find the way in which they're appealing to be very, very interesting. They say they're now appealing against the decision, according to the BBC, along with University College Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust and Leeds Teaching Hospital NHS Trust. These three bodies are appealing this High Court decision, and the NHS service Tavistock say that the move harms young people with gender dysphoria. Doctors and patients have told the BBC that the ruling could cause distressed trans teens to self-harm or even take their own lives. And young trans people have been giving their reaction, with one calling the ruling honestly terrifying. So
if they can't give them the puberty blockers, this is a risk to the trans kids.
Yes, and if we can't give your children untested drugs, that's a form of oppression. That's where we are.
I don't even know what to say. Like this.
Well, I would suggest that trans activists have persuaded these children that, in fact, there is something going on with them that may or may not be true. I'm not in a position to judge, but I think for them to say that's honestly terrifying. I mean, having to wait a couple of years before being given any kind of treatment, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to do in order to protect the obviously going to be large number of children who are not sure, and as with Miss Bell, were essentially drawn in and encouraged in to the process and ended up getting surgery. I think it would be better to err on the side of caution and not mutilating the bodies of children than I would essentially giving in to Twitter activists. And so this is something that Tavistock are not happy with. They say that any access to medication will not be automatically withdrawn as a result of the ruling, but they've confirmed that no new referrals are being accepted. So there are still children on puberty-blocking drugs that are experimental at the moment that is completely legal for them to carry on with. A spokesperson.
So they can't give it to new kids, or
yeah, they're not accepting new applications. A spokesperson for the NHS Trust involved told the BBC this is a temporary pause, and Dr. Adrian Harrop, a GP from Liverpool who has defended the right of children to begin transitioning, says young trans people now have had the rug pulled out from under them. It makes me terribly worried that there is now nothing there for those children and nothing that can be done to help them. Parents are at being left at a point where they're having to struggle to cope with these children who are in a real state of distress and anxiety. Sadly, there's a very risk of seeing more suicides. Well, that is a potential risk that has to be weighed on one side. Of course, the other side is actually not really about risk at all, but actually about consequence. There are consequences to taking puberty blockers. These consequences are not very well understood because these medications are experimental, but we can find some studies that will tell us about it. This, reported by the National Pulse, a paper called Growing Pains, The Problems with Puberty Suppression in Treating Gender Dysphoria, was written by a team of three experts: Dr. Paul W. Hurrers, a professor at Washington University School of Medicine; Dr. Lawrence S. Mayer, a scholar in residence at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine; and a professor at Arizona State University, Dr. Paul R. McHugh, University Distinguished Service Professor of Psychiatry at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. So people that I, as a layman, I'm looking at saying, well, they seem credentialed. They seem to know what they're talking about. They've done this. It's a meta-study as well. The study examines 50 peer-reviewed studies on gender dysphoria in children and considers emerging treatments for the condition, including hormonal treatments such as puberty blocking, which is using hormones to suppress biological puberty, and surgical intervention. So the previous doctor's complaint, Dr. Harrop, his complaint is, well, that there might be a problem. There might be suicides. These kids who are having gender dysphoria, there are a few hundred maybe that Tavistock is treating, have got a real state of distress and anxiety. That's terrible. That's bad. Obviously, we don't want kids in distress and anxiety, and there's nothing that can be done to help them. Well, there seems to be only one tool in the box of the transgender activists to deal with gender dysphoria, and that is transitioning. And so I don't think we're allowed to make any recommendations about maybe other aspects that can be looked into or something like this, because that's politically incorrect, and you will get a large activist lobby coming down on your head. And I say we, I mean like people who are interested in the subject, doctors, who want to, you get other, an aggressive lobby attacking you and defaming you. But anyway, in this study, they say that potential adverse effects include disfiguring acne, high blood pressure, weight gain, abnormal glucose tolerance, breast cancer, liver disease, thrombosis, and cardiovascular disease. And finally, as Dr. Ryan Anderson notes, all of the children who persist in their transgender identity and take puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones will be infertile. So these are major life-changing events. And there are other problems with like bone development and stuff like this. But again, this is experimental. These are preliminary findings, but they seem to be really quite consequential. And back in March 2019, Tavistock was accused of covering up these negative side effects by an Oxford University professor. Dr. Michael Biggs, an associate professor at Oxford's Department of Sociology, claims that the Gender Identity Development Service at Tavistock has been giving puberty-blocking hormones to children without robust evidence as to the long-term effects. Declaring the trial a success, the clinic continued to treat over 1,000 children with hormones, but Dr. Biggs' research suggests that after a year of treatment, a significant increase was found in patients who had been born female self-reporting to the staff that they deliberately tried to hurt or kill themselves. The patients also reported a significant increase in behavioral and emotional problems and a significant decrease in physical well-being in children born female. According to his research, there was no positive impact on the experience of gender dysphoria, the diagnosis given to those who are described as feeling intensely uncomfortable with their biological sex. Dr. Biggs said, "Puberty blockers are exacerbating gender dysphoria, yet the study has been used to justify rolling out this drug regime to several hundred children under the age of 16. A Freedom of Information request to the NHS Health Research Authority showed that the study's own research protocol stated, it is not clear what the long-term effects of early suppression may be on bone development, height, sex organ development, body shape, and the reversibility of the treatment if stopped during pubertal development." In an interview with The Guardian in 2015, Dr. Carmichael of the Tavistock Centre said, "Nothing is completely reversible." This has been lobbied by a charity called Mermaids. Before 2010, puberty blockers were only prescribed to over 16s, but Biggs claims that the clinic's caution was opposed by Mermaids, the charity that identifies people as trans and refers them to the Gender Identity Research and Development Clinic, or the Education Society, whose purpose is to, quote, improve the lives of trans and gender non-conforming people. So let's assume that all of these activist organizations on the left who are promoting puberty blocking for transgender people are acting in good faith, and they are not just zealots who have a belief that they want to try and impose on reality and make reality change to fit their mold. Let's assume they're acting in good faith. If Dr. Biggs is right in his studies and his research that there is no increased positive impact on the experience of gender dysphoria because of puberty blockers, which are, again, experimental drugs, and in fact it seems to exacerbate the problems of gender dysphoria, and it has this whole host of various other medical conditions and infertility that end up with this, how on earth could it be that this could be allowed? And so essentially we have to hope that the Court of Appeals considers all of this information and denies the Tavistock Centre's appeal. But the question is, why is the Tavistock Centre not, like, considering these facts? Because it appears that these are facts that we have established. Why are they not like, well, actually, we actually, you know, we want to help. We don't just want to apply a process that we have agreed on. And if the process isn't working, as Dr. Biggs is suggesting, then why don't they revise it or scrap it or do something else?
I mean, what's happening with Tavistock here? So they're not able to take new. I don't even want to call them patients, but they say patients on.
Yeah. No, they can take new patients, just not children.
Just not
I
children.
mean, and it's not even that they can't take children. What it is, they can't prescribe puberty-blocking hormones to them,
Okay, so they can't give them untested drugs, which
is a start.
okay, because I'm wondering why the government haven't said anything about this.
Because why would they? Like, would you want to get involved with the angry trans lobby on Twitter?
Because that's the thing. I remembered. I didn't get this up beforehand. So I wanted to mention it here. Was that there was actually a debate about allowing self-identification to become the standard for becoming trans in the NHS, and just figured out it's Liz Truss, the lady we spoke about before, who came out and said, "No, I'm not doing that." And they're keeping it in, so you have to get a medical diagnosis rather than self-ID.
Good for her.
So they seem to understand that there's a problem here, and that the trans lobby are not legitimate people. They're just activists. Like they're not representing the trans people in this country at all.
Well, it's not about them representing the trans people. They're not representing the science as far as these scientists see it and have researched it. And they're being accused of covering up the fact that they're not representing the science, presumably in favour of their ideological agenda, which is to promote transgenderism and the normalisation of transgenderism.
To the cost of anything else and everything else.
Apparently to the cost of the long-term interest of the people involved. If you're being encouraged to take drugs that are going to leave you with various kind of bone cancers or other kind of cancers or various other awful conditions and sterile, at the end of it, I don't, and this is for them to be able to explore their gender identity before they reach puberty. That seems very one-sided to me. I think that this is not the response. This is not the prudent or responsible thing that a parent would want for their children, because they say, okay, well, look, you might be having emotional problems, and we'll have therapy for your emotional problems, but we're not going to allow you to destroy your body as a child. You know, that's got to be off the table.
Did Tavistock admit what they've done is wrong or anything like that?
No,
because I remember that this court case, which was
this is what the appeal's about. They're like, no, this is terrible.
Yeah, but what's interesting is as soon as the court case was done, during the court case, Tavistock were asked to produce a list of how many children had come in and how many of those they had given the puberty blockers to, and they refused. They were just like, no, we're not giving that over. So it was a court case.
Really? I didn't know that.
It came out immediately after the court case ended, because they were like, oh no, the data's being compiled. We don't know. And then it was compiled and then released the day after, and it showed, what was it? All but one of the children had come in, had been given the...
Yes, there was nearly 100% follow-through rate, wasn't there, from like being dragged into the process to taking the drugs and going through the procedures.
Which...
seems a bit high.
It's
I mean, in fact, I recall us covering this because they had interpreted this as, in fact, there's much higher demand than we realised, so we should be expanding the scope of our operation, which is not what that implies at all. It implies that there's something weird going on in the Tavistock Centre.